I want to talk to you tonight about two cups. Romans 5 said that because that one man sinned against God, sin entered into the world, but even more terrible for us, it was passed on and it entered into us. The worst part of that is it subjected us to the wrath of God that comes on the children of disobedience. And Jesus knew what was coming. And as he agonized in the garden, saying even sweat as it were drops of blood, he ended up with this prayer: Father, if there's any possibility, if there's any other way, can this cup pass? If not, he said, I will drink it. He wasn't talking about the communion cup that they just had at the Last Supper. What he was talking about was the cup of wrath that was going to be poured out on him. He knew that God's wrath was on all of those that walked in disobedience. He'd seen the flood that came in Noah's day. He'd seen the fire that rained down on Sodom and Gomorrah. Jesus was looking ahead to you and I. Jesus was looking back to Job and Abraham and David and all of those that had died in faith, believing he would come and rescue them from the wrath of God. Father, if there's any other way, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, I will drink it all. And all of the wrath of God against sin was poured out on him. And yet he opened not his mouth as a lamb to the slaughter. He was cut off out of the land of the living. He was crucified for the transgression of the people. But at that moment, he realizes the agony of all of that cup being poured out on him, and he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? He knew why. It's because he had become sin in the eyes of God on our behalf. He made his soul the offering for our sin. He died in faith, believing, I will rise again. He told his disciples 2 or 3 times, I'm going to die. The third day I will rise again. I have this promise from the Father. I can lay down my life and take it up again. So in the midst of all of this agony and suffering, he comforted himself with the promise of God. The same way that God expects you and I to live in the midst of tragedy and struggle in our lives. Put your faith in the promise of the Father, knowing that he will not abandon you and forsake you forever, that you will rise again and live and dwell with him for eternity. Jesus offered to his disciples a cup and said, this is my blood, which is shed for you. Jesus took the cup of wrath in our place. And in turn, he offers us the cup of forgiveness, the cup of blessing, the cup of redemption. And that's what we celebrate in our communion. That's what he meant when he said, I want you to do this in remembrance of me. We have 2 choices in this life. Number 1, to accept that an infinite God could send his infinite Son to pay our infinite penalty. He could go to hell in our place, and somehow in that 3 days, in his infinity, he could pay the price for my eternal redemption. Choice number 2, a finite you can pay the infinite penalty, which is eternity in hell. I choose Jesus. I choose the cup of blessing. I don't want to ever see the cup of wrath. I don't want to ever experience any of that. I don't want that for my friends. I don't want that for my family. I don't want that for any of you. We have a chance to experience the cup of blessing because he drank the cup of wrath.